I think it's sort of the same thing that we were able to build a company with so little cash. That was the hard thing. The technology I'm very proud of, but the financial engineering that we did, I think was extraordinary because you know, I tell people that I started Atari with $500 and nobody believes me, but we did it. Hi, my name's Nolan Bushnell, and I'm credited with building the first video game that was commercial. It was called Computer Space. And later I founded Atari, and kind of the rest is history. I played games on a blanket outside in the summers. They were board games. We played Clue and Sorry and Monopoly and kind of the classics. But we also played card games that were, I loved gin rummy. I loved playing canasta, and those were all quite fun. But then I got really involved in ham radio, and that's really where I got some of my electronics chops. And then I learned chess, and chess was very magical to me. I think that my favorite magazine was Popular Electronics, and it was a small magazine. It was a monthly, and it had projects in it that you could build yourself. I also liked there were some science fiction anthologies. One were kind, strange worlds and magical kingdoms and what have you. It was kind of this blend between science fiction and fantasy. At the University of Utah, there was a company. There was a game that was programmed on the big computers. It was a PDP. It was a PDP-1, and a guy named Steve Russell at MIT had programmed a game called Space War. And of course, these were $1 million computers, and so we'd have to sneak into the computer lab late at night to play the games. And we got really good at being able to break into the computer lab at 3 o'clock in the morning so we could play games. And that was my first experience. It was a game that was it was basically space war. It was 2 rocket ships flying around the sun, shooting at each other. And that was fun. I love video games. Like I've just been playing a game called Mini Metro, which is kind of fun. I also play Halo and Fortnite and these. But I also like some of the old games. My son has a game called Polycade that has a lot of the old retro games, and I was playing Dig Dug the other day for an hour. I felt even at that point, because I was working at an amusement park at the time and I was managing an arcade, and I knew what a coin-operated game needed to cost. I knew how much it needed to make. And I felt that if I could put that screen with a coin slot on it, it would definitely make enough money. The problem was the cost. The cost was, $1 million computer, 25 cents a play. It wasn't. But I felt that the cost of compute power was dropping every day. and that someday it would be cheap enough to be able to do it. And 3 years later, it was, and it did. Yeah, it was basically, I created a game, a system where we could have a rocket ship flying across the screen. And that's all it was. And I was able to license that to a company called Nutting Associates. And they hired me to put it into production. And that was Computer Space. And so in the fall of 1970, Computer Space was brought to the marketplace, and it sold about $2 million worth of product. And that was kind of the very first video game, but it was a licensed. And then after that, I decided to start Atari, and that was Pong. I think because it was so simple, and I think that the simpleness of it was really important at that time, because people were not used to playing games. They didn't understand them. And so simple was good. Atari was essentially created with my partner and I, a guy named Ted Dabney. And Ted was a very good engineer in the analog space. I was very good in the digital space. And we formed this partnership. And we used the money that we got in royalties from the first game and got 2 more contracts. When Atari started, we thought ourselves as being an engineering firm, not a manufacturing firm, because we had no money and we had no factory. and so as we got more involved, it turns out that Pong was a very simple game to build. And we contracted with the cabinet maker, and they made the cabinets, and we stuffed the PC board, and we were off to the races. And so in the early days of Atari, we were just assembling, and then we got to be more sophisticated and turned it into a real company. A Pong game, for example, had 70 integrated circuits on it. It was way too complex and too expensive for the home. But then a technology came along that was called N-channel MOS. It was fast enough, and you could put the whole intelligence on a single chip. And the single chip would cost you $8. By the time you got it in the packaging, you were up to about $20, and you could sell it for $60. That's kind of the way it worked. Oh boy. I probably had to do a critical decision every day. And because we never had enough money. We were always sort of on the edge of bankruptcy. And it was tough. It was tough for us. And I can say that, I was 30 years old. I'd never been a CEO of a big company. I've never been CEO of a big company. I was manager of the game department of the amusement park, but that was somebody else's. It was, trying to make sure that we had enough money in the bank to make payroll was always a struggle. I used to always say the difference between an entrepreneur and an employee is an employee looks forward to payroll, an entrepreneur hates it. Breakout was a game that I designed literally while I was in Hawaii, just playing around. But I couldn't get any of my engineers to do it. So I assigned it to a guy named Steve Jobs, and he was on the night shift. And I knew that he had a friend, Steve Wozniak, who would actually do the work. And I gave him the project, told him I'd give him a bonus if it came in under a certain number of chips. And 2 weeks later, it was done. And that was amazing. Usually a game like that took at least 2 or 3 months to complete. But Wozniak was a true savant, and he pulled it off, and it was a great game. And it turned out to be a very, very successful game. And of course, Steve Jobs turned out to be a very successful businessman. I got to tell you, though, after Steve left Atari, he asked me if I wanted to be the first investor in Apple, and that I could have had a third of Apple computer for $50,000. And I had it, but I turned him down, which I really regret. That would have been a good investment. The consumer division needed to make large numbers of units at a low price. The coin-op division had to make fewer units, but they were big, they were bulky, they were expensive, $1,500, $2,000 at the time. And so the whole manufacturing process was very, very, very different. What isn't well known is that we also started a pinball division, and we created pinballs in Atari as well. And that was quite successful early on. And then we did the computer division, where we created a personal computer, the Atari 800 and 400. Really, the games that were being produced at the time were pinballs and arcade games, but they were basically big, clunky mechanical things. The video game changed all that. And all of a sudden it became an electronic business. All the previous games were really based on relays. No solid state, no vacuum tubes. It was just mechanical and relays. And so that made it very, very different in terms of manufacturing. It also made it very different in terms of repair. We had to teach all the operators completely different skills about how you repair a coin-op video game than what they were used to. In terms of the arcade games, probably the most successful, well, there were 3 that were very successful. One was Track 10, that was a driving game. One was Breakout, the game that Steve Jobs did, and one was Pong. Each were sort of at the top of its class at that particular time. Then later on, Tempest did very well, as did Centipede. And so those were, and Asteroids. Asteroids did extremely well. In the consumer side, Home Pong did very well, but the 2600 was just a blowout success because we made so much money on cartridges. The cartridges cost us literally $3 to build, and we were selling them as fast as we could make them for $12 and hitting a retail at $20. So it was a cash machine for us. I think the best marketing campaign was actually by Sears with the original Pong game, because a lot of people didn't even know that a video game exists, let alone that you could hook it up to your own TV. And so they had the double thing of talking about how cool the games were and that you could do it, that they existed. And when they would run an ad, they would sell out to the, totally by the end of the weekend. And so it was their ad campaign was very good, and it was called Doreen, and it was kind of a corny ad, but it sure sold a lot of product. Well, I really am emotionally attached to Pong just because it was our first big one, and we really invented Atari at that time. We figured out what we needed to do as a company, and it's always fun to be, it's part of the Genesis story, as I call it. I'm also emotionally very attracted to Breakout, because it was one where I felt that there was an interesting backstory. The fact that Steve Jobs and Wozniak worked on it, and then it became such a big success. Breakout actually launched the video game business in Japan. Pong didn't do well in Japan because it wasn't part of the culture for kids to bring other kids home to them. So it needed to be a one-player game. And so that was supplied by Breakout, and Breakout became very successful in Japan. I think that the breakdown had absolutely nothing to do with the ET game. I think that it was a total mistake on the part of the Warner management. What they didn't do is they forgot to innovate, and they tried to push another 2 or 3 million 2600s into a saturated market, and it was just too much. There wasn't any sales left, and so when those didn't sell, the retailers would put in cartridges, assuming that those new consoles would sell and that the cartridge would be there. And so there was a way overabundance of both consoles and cartridges. And so the prices just fell down as they tried to get rid of inventory. That was the real problem. I don't know. The company needed more cash to build the factory for the 2600. I think I could have tried to raise money another way, but we just didn't have enough cash to bring the 2600 into the market. And so, I don't know. I've had a good life with the decision I made. After I sold Atari, I was able to sort of focus on my personal life, and I got married and started having kids, and that was worthwhile. And I probably wouldn't have done that if I'd still been working. When I left Atari, it was hard because it was my baby. But, once you sell a company, you kind of have to say, okay, it's got new parents now. You're not the parent anymore. But you still have an emotional attachment. So when you see them screwing up, it really is kind of bitter. The only sweet part is I kind of saw it coming. And so I shorted their stock, and I made a whole bunch of money on the stock market when they screwed up. So I made money on their pain, but I still felt the pain. Most of the way, the biggest challenge, we didn't have enough capital. A lot of companies today, they get capitalized at $10, $20 million. Our paid-in capital was $500. And that was just not enough. And so we never had money. We never had, we were always trying to do things the cheap and dirty way. We tried to make sure that everything we did was very efficient. And it would have been better if we could have just been a little bit less frugal. Like we never had a sign. We would just paint Atari on the door because we couldn't afford to have a sign out front. Things like that. We were just always cheapskates. I think it's sort of the same thing, that we were able to build a company with so little cash. That was the hard thing. The technology I'm very proud of, but the financial engineering that we did, I think, was extraordinary. Because I tell people that I started Atari with $500, and nobody believes me, but we did it. and so that I think was a very, very hard and very special accomplishment. Well, I was just there to be on the board, and the company was way different. I mean, it was in France. I like going to Paris a couple of times a year, 4 times a year. Paris is always fun to hang out. And being on the board, it was a whole set of different problems. It was more about sort of harvesting the goodwill that the Atari name had, as opposed to really innovating product. And I felt that the company had kind of lost its innovative flair. No, I don't, but I was very, very good at asteroids. I remember that. I'd say that I could go into a random bar and beat anybody there at asteroids. A little bit, but mostly I was focusing mostly on Chuck E. Cheese at the time. And so Chuck E. Cheese was an operator of games as opposed to a creator of games. And so I was still involved in the game business, but pretty much as an arcade operator, if you would. Because Chuck E. Cheese was this chain of great big, arcades. I don't think there are any Chuck E. Cheeses in Italy right now. I'm not sure. I think there will be a combination of things that are going on. One, there will be a lot more games, like virtual reality with the headsets is getting to be very, very good right now. And I think that that's kind of at the genesis point for mass adoption. I think self-driving cars are going to provide a new element. I think people are going to be playing games when they're in their cars. I think that mobile is going to continue to be big, but I think geo-platforming is going to become even more important, where you play games on the streets of the city you live in, and where the whole cityscape becomes your playboard. I think that games will continue to be complex. I think they'll become slightly more social. I think people like to be social, not just online, but playing games with each other. I think board games are going to get to be very important. But I think that we as a human species will spend a lot bigger percentage of our time playing games in the future, maybe as much as 20% more. Well, I think that the breakpoints are the creation of the video game, coin-op, then moving it to the home, then moving it to the computer. And then there was then once the games were on the computer, there was the kind of everything before Doom and after Doom. Doom was kind of a watershed program that kind of changed games after that. And then we have the Nintendo and the PlayStation and the Xbox. Each of those represented a leap forward in technology and resolution. And then the Facebook acquisition of Oculus really supercharged the VR component. And I think those are sort of the main milestones. I think the next milestone will be when VR headsets exceed 10 million units. And I think they'll do that next year. Yeah, I've got two projects. One is a game that is a treasure hunt that I'm going to do one of these days. I just haven't gotten around to it. The other one is an American football game that I want to do, which I haven't gotten around to. But I'll do them one of these days. Oh, you asked me once before what my biggest failure was on games. I've got to tell you, the consumer product that was the biggest failure was a thing called video music, which was kind of created. You'd hook it up to your stereo and it'd make pretty pictures on your TV screen. It was a major failure. I think we sold 6 at full price. It was just a disaster. In terms of coin-op, the biggest disaster was a game called Gotcha. It was our third game out, and it was horror. It was a horror show. And so those are the two big failures. Think about the marketing before you think about the game. Young developers always think about the product before they think about marketing, when it should be the other way. Today, you want to be able to sell something. And in order to sell something, you have to have a unique promise in the market. And the market has so many offerings right now that you have to find a niche. If you don't find that niche, you'll just be lost. And all your development will be wasted. So start with the marketing. That's the main piece. I've got a robot around here, but I can't get it out. Geez, I've got all kinds of stuff here. I can't think of one that really sticks out. Well, my owl. Let me illuminate my owl. I love my owl.
Yes, it's very.
Isn't that a good owl?
Very beautiful.
It's a great owl. Oh, and actually, there's kind of a fun thing. Notice this clock behind me, and when I set a timer, Alexa, set 15-minute timer.
15 minutes, starting now. By the way, during this busy time of year, I can remind you to do something later so you don't forget. Just say, remind me.
Now it'll light up. See? This is the model for computer space that was then blown up. And have you seen what computer space looks like? It's the big cabinet, the fiberglass. Well, I modeled this on my kitchen table and then took it to a fiberglass company and they scaled it up. But that's a real artifact. It's 50 years old. Oh, I have been to Italy so many times. It's my favorite place. In fact, we were in Puglia for Christmas last year. We stayed just outside of Chisinau. You know, it's about 100 kilometers from Bari. And I love Milan because Well, you've got that big mall thing, but more than that, Milan in October, November with white truffle season is magical. Like, I could eat white truffles till the cows come home. I just think they're so good. And if you have a good white truffle risotto or gnocchi, oh my God, it's just happy. I was hired to do a speech in Milan one time, and they asked my speaking agent, "What does Nolan like?" And he says he just loves truffles. And it happened to be in October. And from the time I got there, they treated me to more truffles than I almost got sick of them, but I didn't.